Hello everyone, I am out here on the deck on a beautiful late afternoon and I'm going to do the beginning of the garden season Q&A. So I asked for questions both here and on Instagram, so I'll go over those with you. But first, my garden was in a magazine and I'm so excited. So Garden Gate magazine had a container garden competition. They do this every year. I did not know about it until Eric from Grow For Me Gardening let me know. So I would not have gotten in this magazine without him. And so I submitted some photos following the link that they posted. They emailed me and said, we would like to include your garden. I did a quick phone interview and I'm so excited. This was back in maybe February and I'm in the May-June issue. So, well, maybe I'll show you my garden first and then I'll show you what I realized. So first, here's my garden. This is the garden I'm sitting on right now. It looks a little more full in this photo because this was taken last, I think, July. This is my favorite photo of my back deck. And I sent in maybe 5 or 6, and obviously they chose the one that was also my favorite. And they did a little write-up here, so this is really cool. But what I realized, so I was in the honorable mentions section. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total. So 1 grand champion, 2 runner up, and then the rest were all the honorable mentions. Now, when I first opened the article and saw this is the section on it, and then turned the page, I was like, oh, they meant one container design, not a garden full of different containers. But the intention was to submit your container design. So when I saw that this is what they actually meant by the competition, I was even extra grateful that I even got included, because this is not what I submitted, but this is absolutely stunning. This is from Susan Knock in Massachusetts, and that was her grand prize winning design. So definitely pick up a copy of this if you want to see a little blurb on me and my garden. I did get a second copy, so I'm already subscribed, but I did order a second copy so I could have this one with my garden in it and a second one where I tore out the page that had my garden and put that in my little binder that I have of all of my kind of garden experiences and memorabilia. So that is really exciting. Oh, and they do this every year. So they already, when they posted these winners, they already announced that next January is when they'll have the submission deadline for container designs for this year. So make sure to take a lot of photos of your garden if you don't already. And then I will in no way remember this in January. So I put a little calendar reminder in of when to go to the website and submit. And I will link down below the page with all the information for next year's challenge submissions. So I would recommend doing that as well, unless you have a much better memory than me, but put in just a little reminder, January 2025, that the entrance for this is coming up. And because I was selected to be in the magazine, their prizes were some of these, is it Upsy-Daisy? Yeah, Upsy-Daisy planter inserts. So if you have a larger pot and you don't want to fill the whole thing with soil, I do this a lot with my larger pots where I have annuals. I'm really only using like the top 1/3, maybe half of the soil. All the rest is just like wasted soil that the plant roots are never touching, and it makes the container heavier. So if you want to put this in, it might go down like, let's say, halfway. There's nothing under here, all the soil's up here, and then there's holes obviously for things to drain out of, but that way it also keeps your planters light. Now, I don't know if I have any of the sizes, because these are quite large, and most of my super large containers have perennials in them, which I do use all the space for. I actually want to see if they have smaller ones, because the plants that I use in my plant traps, which lift plants off the ground and allow them to hang on gates, the weight limit there is 15 pounds, and I only do annuals, so I don't use the whole container. So I would love to find some smaller ones, but then I might think, I have to look this up, but if the containers themselves are smaller, maybe there isn't a need for this product. But anyway, I'm excited to see if I can get these to fit in any of the pots I do have, where I don't need the entire reservoir, and see how they do. So with that, let's now move on to the questions. So first off, if you wanted a shade tree in a pot on your balcony, which one would you pick and why? As always, thanks for the inspiration. So a tree that is on like my tree wish list, and my number one is a tricolor beech. So those are like pink and green variegated leaves. They're so pretty, and they do better in shade because the variegation on the leaves means that they are a little bit more sensitive to sunlight, so the sun can really fry your variegated leaves. And in Chicago, I fell in love with them just from walking around and being like, what is that pink tree? So in Chicago, I did notice they're all planted either on the north or east side of houses. Now, what I don't know is if there are dwarf varieties that will grow well in pots. Now, I do know people that grow full-grown trees on their decks, assuming that you have the space and the deck capacity that it won't break your home. So that is an option. Also, when I was walking around another garden tour, there was a guy that grew evergreens, and he said that basically once the tree starts to die out because it gets too large for the pot, he just cuts down the tree. So maybe get a small one. I don't know how quickly they grow, but maybe get a small one, and then kind of once it hits that limit, you can just say goodbye to it. That kind of always breaks my heart, but I know people that do that. The other option that I know a lot of people do in containers, and there are smaller varieties, are Japanese maples. Those I know do well in pots, and there are some that only get like a few feet tall. So definitely Japanese maple would be my other recommendation. We do actually have one growing in our parkway, and it's completely shaded by very tall maple trees. So it barely gets like any dappled light at all, and it does great. Now, there is a gardener. Let me look up her YouTube name so I say it correctly. So 17M Squared Garden. So 17M2 Garden. She gardens in France. Her garden faces north, and she has so many beautiful colors. So if you're looking for inspiration for a shaded garden, definitely check out her channel. So I'll link her down below as well, but I'm pretty sure she has a Japanese maple in a container also, I think. But definitely check out her channel and her Instagram, because her garden is so beautiful and full of color, and not something I would have thought you could do in a shady space. Next question. I keep watching your shorts of the garden in full bloom. I have been sharing more shorts because I want to share little snippets of the garden that might not make it into a full video or might be a little bit delayed. You inspired me. Now I have 60 pots, many large, spread across my patio deck. Since I am in Florida, I want to install a drip system. I would definitely recommend that. Do you like Proven Winners water-wise, or do you recommend something else? So the first irrigation system I ever used was Proven Winners, their water-wise system, and I still have it set up. However, after having a lot of pots and having a few years of experience using irrigation, it would actually not be my recommendation unless you have like a small number of pots. I think on the package it says it's not really meant for more than 10 pots. So a few reasons why it's not my kind of go-to now. My go-to right now is a Carpan system that I use, that I got on Amazon. And then now that I'm more comfortable with irrigation, I've also started to buy like my own individual pieces and customize what I have. But I don't think the water-wise system is meant for a larger container garden. The main tube where the water runs through, I think, is only a 1/4 inch, so it's very small for a main tube. There's not a lot of great pressure, whereas the Carpan system, I'm pretty sure the main tube is a 1/2 inch, so more water can flow through at longer distances. And honestly, if I was starting from scratch, I probably would do all custom and use a larger main tube that runs through, but I will link down the video where I show myself setting up the Carpan system back here. And it's really easy once you get a hang of it. It can kind of seem a bit overwhelming at first, but I promise you it's just like line the tube here, snip, put a tube in, connect it to your plant. Oh, another thing that I like better about the Carpan system, let me actually see if I can grab an emitter to show you. All right, so this is the emitter on the system that I use. The difference between this and Proven Winners is just a circle with a little drip that comes out, whereas this sprays in kind of like a mini sprinkler, like it sprays in a 360 around. So if I'm using the Proven Winners system, I have to set the drip up to one plant only. And for example, my raised beds, that means I have to have a drip set up to every plant in the bed so it gets targeted. Whereas with this, I can increase or decrease the radius of the spray by twisting up or down. So I can hit multiple plants in a raised bed. For example, these back here, I think I use 3 total to cover the entire bed, and I definitely have more than 3 plants in each of those. So that's another reason I like these. Final reason is that with the Proven Winners, you can't like turn on and off an individual drip. Here, if I twist all the way down, it's off. So sometimes I don't have a pot for every emitter when I have this set up. So the ones that aren't in pots, it's not just going to run water onto the deck. I can twist it down, and then that way nothing comes out of this. So while Proven Winners works. I think for my situation and the more pots you get, something like this is a much better option compared to the Proven Winners drip kit. So that is my recommendation. Next is, what order do you put your flowers outside based on cooler temps and potential frost? Would assume perennials first, and most say petunias can handle cold, not freezing temps. I'm in a similar zone to you. So yes, definitely perennials will go out first for me, but what I have to be careful of is the amount of water that we are getting in the early spring when the temperatures are still cool. If I talk about root rot on this channel too much, I apologize, but that is what kills most of my plants in the early spring. It's not leaving my plants out over winter. My bulbs survive over winter just fine. My trees survived over winter just fine. But once we get days and days in a row of rain and the temperatures are like 40-ish degrees, which again is not cold enough to kill any of my perennials, but the soil in the containers stays too wet and the roots rot because it's not warm enough for the soil to dry out in between the rain that it's getting. I mean, if we get rain for days and days in a row in the summer, that's usually fine because it's so hot. But when it's cold and that combination of all the water, my roots just rot. So I actually delayed moving some of my perennials out until after that period of rain. And sometimes still, like if the soil's still wet, I'll move them in for the night or two and then move them back out if I don't want the soil staying too moist. So in terms of temperature, yes, perennials will go out for me first, but make sure to keep in mind the potential issues with that root rot. Then I will bring my annuals out kind of in two shifts. One are the ones that are a little bit more cold tolerant, and then the ones that are heat loving and not very cold tolerant. So things like my petunias, my gomphrena usually do fine with nighttime temperatures being consistently 50 or above. I mean, sometimes too I can push it to like high 40s and they're okay. But I really look for when nighttime temperatures are consistently at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And then my second round will be the more heat loving. So tomatoes, peppers, basil, those I like to wait until 60 degrees at night if I'm not getting too impatient, but that's kind of my safe zone for when I know I can move those outside and not have to worry about it. So that is my general strategy on when I move things out. Next is, this may be Illinois specific, but how do you prepare for cicadas this year? Do you use some protections? I'm doing nothing. I'm gonna see what happens. Now I know this is like the cicada apocalypse. I will say in general, I rarely see them up here anyway. I don't know if they either don't prefer it or don't know my garden's up here. But also I think what I've read is at most risk is really, really young fruit trees. And I do have some of those, but they're so small that if I start to see an issue with cicadas, I might just move them inside for like a few days and then pop them back out. But I'm not like covering anything. I'm not doing anything to really prepare ahead of time. Whether that is a good plan or not, I guess we'll see. But yeah, my plan is to do nothing and hope for the best. And again, if I do see an issue, then I'll just bring my plants inside. And I'll check too, because I might not see the cicadas, but I think it's the laying of the eggs. So I'll just check my trees once in a while. But again, I don't really have too many super small baby trees. Next is, have you grown hollyhocks in containers? And if so, do they come back as a perennial? I have not yet. This is my first year growing hollyhocks. Now I'm growing two varieties, one that I believe should actually flower the first year, and two that I think will take until the second year. And the main reason I haven't before is that limited space in my garden, waiting for something to flower for a second year isn't really something I want to do. So I've kind of been putting it off. But then from Eric and Christopher from Grow For Me Gardening, they had some really beautiful champagne hollyhock. They sent me some seeds. Those are the ones they said should flower the first year. So I'm going to try that. Now, the other reason, like I've mentioned with the issues of root rot, is I don't always trust that something's going to come back in my garden if I leave it outside. Like all my hydrangea bushes, my rose bush, my peonies, my apple trees, those are overwintered in my garage while I can carry them. If not, I will put them under like a covered greenhouse, but I don't leave any of those outside because I don't expect them to survive. My bulbs usually rot. These trees, not looking great. So I don't want to rely on having to overwinter something for it to bloom, but I did get a really pretty black hollyhock seed that I started. So I'm going to try and see what happens. But I think I will have to bring it into a garage over winter in order for it to survive here. Next question. Have you had any luck using self-watering containers that have a reservoir on the bottom? I would say yes and no. I used for the first time last year the Proven Winners lightweight aquapots. Those worked really well. I loved that I could fill them up once a week, maybe slightly more often in like the heat of summer, but that was just a couple weeks out of the year. But generally I filled them up once a week and they did perfectly fine. And I really liked those. The ones I didn't like were from Home Depot. And the problem was where the water reservoir sits, it's still very close to where the actual root ball is. So I felt like the root ball of the plants was just sitting in water. Whereas the Aquapot Light, there is more of like I'm not going to explain this well. The plants are more raised up in the aquapot and then the water's all down here versus the water being like right underneath where the plants are sitting. So I would say yes and no. I have had good luck with some that I like, and then not that I've had bad luck, but I just didn't think other types worked as great. But I do want to try to get some more if I can find ones that again work well, because it is really nice to not have to set up everything on irrigation and have things like that where I know I can water just one time a week and like be gone for a long weekend or whatever that might be. So we'll see, but I do plan to expand the ones that I'm currently using. Next, are all of your plants from seed? No, I would say about, I was going to say half, but maybe not. But my rule in general is that if I'm only growing 1, 2, maybe 3 of a certain variety and I can readily find it in a store, I will go and do that. Even though technically buying a pack of seeds is cheaper than buying a plant. Let's say I was going to grow basil. I can get a pack of 50 seeds. I'd maybe sow 6 of those seeds, like 2 in 3 different cells to ensure I got 1 plant. So then I still have 44 seeds left over that I'm going to work through very slowly. Year after year, germination rates are going to decrease. And I have to put in the time to, I have to plant it in something. So I'm using up one of my planting cells. I have to spend the time making sure I don't kill it while it's growing. So there's more of a time investment that if I'm just going to go to the store and buy 1 basil plant, for me, it's still a lot easier. And once I factor in the cost of like the seed starting equipment, I don't even know if it really is much cheaper to start from seed versus buying it from the store. So that's generally what I do. Like I grow a lot of zinnias, a lot of gomphrena, so that makes sense to start from seed. A lot of plants I can't find in stores, so I will start those from seed as well. But kind of like my simple, easy to find plants, I'll just go ahead and get those at the store. So I'd say about 50-50, maybe leaning a little bit more towards not starting from seed. I don't know, I'll have to kind of pay attention to that this year. Fertilizing regimen for summer annuals. This is definitely one where I could ramble on. So first off, I will say I will link down a video on how I fertilize my plants. But what I try to do is to put a reminder once a week to go through and apply a liquid fertilizer to my annuals, at least my heavy feeding ones, like all of my veggies. Doesn't always happen that I do that every week. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks. Sometimes during the end of the season when I get tired of it, I stop doing it completely. But I do also at planting time plant with some slow release fertilizer as well. But like I said, I have a whole video going into detail, so I will link that down so that you can watch it. I think it's like 30 minutes just talking about fertilizing my garden. Next question, how do you plan or design your garden every year? So basically, I put a lot of thought and effort into the winter. And then once I start on my plants, I forget everything that I planned and just kind of place things around. So I will say, though, what I use when I do try to be more organized. So since I've been gardening here again a few years, I know that like one of my beds will always be gomphrena. I know that my 30-gallon grow bags will always be my vegetable patch. So I just get used to kind of planting things in the same areas year after year. I have my schedule, my seed starting schedule spreadsheet. I will link that video down and the free spreadsheet if you want to use it down below. But what that is great for is I will log the color, the height, the bloom time. That way when I am putting my plants into the raised beds, because a lot of it, like these 3 raised beds along the back, I have a general idea of what I want to put in there, but I haven't like laid out any plans. I like to do it at the time. So I'll just kind of set the plants in, check the heights, see if I need to swap some because one that's taller needs to go in the back, look to see if there's any colors that I want to swap around. So that's what I do. I find that anytime I take the time and effort to plan over winter, It just completely changes based on what seeds did or didn't germinate, how many of them I got. So it's like I plan in the winter and then don't actually follow any of those plans. But I would say if you write down color, height, bloom time, that's really helpful, and spacing that I kind of follow to know when you're arranging things in the garden, where's the best spot for them to go. But once you get more familiar with your garden area, again, like there's some things I already know where they're going to go every year because that's where I like to put them. And then last question, how do you protect your plants from high winds? We do get windy up here, and it's definitely more severe up here than it would be at ground level. However, I will say this brick wall, having a solid wall that's maybe 3 feet, and I think it's a little taller on the front deck around, cuts the wind down so much. Anything that's really below the height of the wall, I don't have to worry about when it gets windy. I do worry about plants that are taller than the wall. So some things I do differently is I will stake more things than I probably would at ground level. So my giant binary zinnias say you don't need to stake, but I will stake them because they have blown over and broken in the wind. My sunflowers I do stake as well because they get taller than the wall. Also, I've stopped planting really tall plants in my elevated bed. So these beds are shorter than the ones on the front deck. The ones on the front deck would probably come to like here. So when I grew giant zinnias in them, they were very tall. So now my giant zinnias get grown in grow bags on the deck. So taller plants stay on like the deck floor. I'll put shorter plants in the elevated bed. So extra staking, the wall helps. I know that that kind of comes with your garden or not, but if you have like a balcony that has open railings, maybe putting something around the balcony to help cut down on the wind would help. Staking and then putting taller things on the ground of my balcony instead of higher up. Oh, also, when I do know that we're going to have a windstorm, there are some things that I will keep up higher normally, and I'll just come and take those off and put those on the ground as well. So my herb rack has a 3 stacks. Sometimes I've had ones on the top blow over, so I just pick them up and set them on the ground, and then I'll move them back once the storm is over. So those are all the questions. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any other questions, let me know down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.